All right. So, where do I want to even start this? By the way, don't mind with the headphones. I'm using them as a mic for now. Just ignore them. Anyway, so probably my journey with reading starts all the way back in the third grade, as one does. And I was in public school, and I had to take a test of some sort that rated where your learning skill was. And either they thought I had ADHD or ADD or some sort of learning disability of some sort, to where they then put me in special education classes from third grade to senior year. And with being in those classes and with having normal classes over top of that, I was massively just forced to read. And later to come to find out that I had dyslexia, and I didn't know that, and no one told me that until I figured it out when I was like in college. And with that being said, is that I obviously hated reading. I was always forced to do it. I always had to do it for biography. I never wanted to do it for fun. And obviously, I'm now 30, and I just know that reading helps people be smarter. Just reading words on a page knowingly makes you smarter. It just does. There's science behind it. You can look it up yourself. So I knew that it was good for me, but I didn't know how good it was for me, which we'll get into. But I really hated reading. What's even funnier about this whole story is that my mom has worked for a book company my entire life. Kid you not. Literally, now she works for Book of the Month. I'm not even gonna get into that story, but like, it's changed names over the years, but more or less, it's so funny that I hated reading. Pretty sure my sister did too. And our mom worked for a book company. We sold books. It's just the funniest story. Anyway, so in high school, there was really only one book that I like enjoyed reading. And I don't actually have that physical copy with me, but I do have the author. I have a couple books lying on my lap, and Ransom Riggs is the author. Very fantasy, very those kind of things. This is actually Tales of the Peculiar. So if you read the rest of the series that goes along with this, is like a novella of the book, if that makes sense. To where this is actually bedtime stories you would tell the kids in this world. And they actually have like really good pictures in those, which like, I'm not even going to talk about the pictures in these books, but that was one in particular thing. I'm going to pause so when I can pick up this book. I just had to cut so I could pick up this book. I'm better now. Anyway. And with Ransom Riggs is that the first book I ever read that I enjoyed, which was in high school, was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And I read that book and fell in love so much with the idea of fantasy. It was something I've never heard of. And I always felt like a weird outcast. So like, this book was on another level of being outcasted because these kids had powers. They were like, time portals. It was a whole thing. If you ever get the chance to read it, or if you have read it, please let me know. Because when I read it, I thought it was such a rarity. Was it like The Hunger Games or Harry Potter? But apparently people have read it like that, to where it's like, if you've liked those books, you might like this series. It's love the entire series. I actually haven't I haven't finished the very last book of that series yet. Just because they're a little lengthy, they kind of remind me of The Hobbit, where you're just traveling and it's kind of boring-ish towards the middle, and that's where I got stuck. So I know I have to finish it. Don't judge me. I've still read over 100 books. Calm down. But that was the book I knew that if I wanted to start reading again years after I graduated high school, that's going to be the book to get me back in. And at this point, they've also made a movie about it. It's on Disney Plus if you're interested. It's a little different than the book, but it's very close. I read the book again, I watched the movie again, and I was like, ooh, now technology is better and I can just Google things that like, you know what I mean? So then the next book that I read back in I think the beginning of 2024, which if you have not even read this series, what are you doing with your life, is Assistant to the Villain, which literally my favorite author of all time, which I've literally had her sign it because she's the only author I've literally met. Love her dearly. She even has a TikTok channel. Regardless, love. She is great from all the things. This book is very fantasy, to where its kind of title implies random townsgirl. It's very medieval times. If you think of that in your head, that's where this kind of place. And girl runs into the town villain kind of accident and then becomes his assistant. And throughout the now 3 to 4 books that this author has written, they slowly fall in love. It's a slow burn. There's so much detail. There's so many side characters. It's so good. And this was kind of second book to Miss Peregrine, to where I was like, ooh, I think I could like this. I think I could like reading because of this. And like, it's that big. So it was great. And now that I'm talking about reading, I have now read over 100 books in the past 2 years, and now 2025. And with it, I've really learned a few things, which, one, it definitely helps me detail or explain things a lot better cohesively to other people, because I'm reading how people are detailed in books and emotional in books, and they're eloquently saying things. And I've even read Prejudice. Like, it's also one of my very first books that I've read. And like, the way things can be explained, and that's very much how authors explain books and explain characters and explain things. That's how my brain works. And I didn't realize that. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. So it definitely helped me be more eloquent and also just more purposeful with what I say to other people on the outside. And then like reading also just became so much faster, like the more that I did it. And that helped with so many other things in my life, that like I'm passing something and I need to read a sign really quick while I'm driving, I can read it now instead of just letting it pass. Where dyslexia was something that I definitely had to overcome with it at first, but it's really not that much of a problem for me anymore. And since I'm not comparing myself to anyone else, I'm just comparing myself to my own journey with it, of like what I used to do or my past, like definitely not that bad. But I can definitely see that reading often is definitely helped my mental state. It's definitely helped me relax. The biggest thing that I use reading with, and I kid you not, you're not listening to anything else in this entire video. Biggest thing that I will say with reading is that if you don't know how to meditate, if you don't know how to calm down, if you don't know how to have like techniques or anything, and you don't know how to go to sleep, reading puts me to sleep every single night. I kid you not. It's one of the top things that I will recommend. Read anything. Preferably don't read anything maybe like, or that you have to like want to, but read something that's very much like, or something else is going on in it, to where you can kind of get lost in it and like for your own problems so you can go to bed. Because that is like the number one thing that I still keep reading to this day, of why I keep reading. Now, I definitely am not as strict as I was the first year and a half with reading, but I'm definitely to the point now where like, I don't read, I freak out a little. Like, I do not like to be in a read, like, or like a show hole, but like a read hole for months on end. That is just like, if I haven't read in a while, I will go to Barnes and Noble and just pick up a random book and be like, I don't care what this is. It looks fantasy. Let's just pick it up. But yeah, all that being said, is that then I've read some books that also just wasted my time. And I started to think, when I had this process, like I was on social media and like other Booktalkers and stuff like that, and I was like, what do they do? And they're like, they just don't read it. I'm like, oh, like you just stop a book? And they're like, yeah, no one's telling you to keep reading it. And my brain was so in tune of like how I did it in public school, to where it was like, have to keep reading a book. So I started to DNF books, which is do not finish. I have a few now, but I've also thought about it and I was like, maybe I want to give them a second chance. Maybe I just had to be in like the right mindset. You know what I mean? So it's definitely, that was a learning curve for me. I've definitely read a few, which this book that I'm going to show you next almost was a DNF, but I finished it so hard. It's Call It What You Want. If you happen to see this anywhere, this book was a book that I bawled my eyes out to, and I never thought I would do that to a book. More or less, it is it's mainly the story of a girl, and she's got an on and off relationship, but it's so deep. It's so like, he just like, are walking down the street at the like end of the book, and like don't ever see each other ever again. And they don't end up happily ever after, but it's like felt so gut-wrenching, and she learned so much through the relationship of being on and off that it hooked me, but I didn't want to finish it because I didn't want to cry, and I was like, you know what, I gotta get through it, you know? This almost was a DNF, but it wasn't. And I honestly, like, you want to learn anything about yourself, this is another book that's another learn about yourself, but this was otherworldly, like it was about a relationship, but the deepness it goes into that relationship was just on another level. And I was just like, whoa. Yeah, so all this. Another thing that probably as of the past 6-7 months, I've been doing a lot of like reviews, and they're kind of book summaries of like, someone would write a 5-star, like write something underneath of it, but mine are like long. Like, this is what I thought, this is what's in the book, this is like PG-13 rating of this book or whatever, like this content in it, and I would be like so methodical of it. And if you're interested in reading them, I have a Fable account. That's the only place. I sometimes put them on Goodreads and Amazon. I usually read on Kindle. But yeah, that's why you don't see any of my spines, because I read them on Kindle and then I buy them as a reward later. But yeah, I've been really enjoying that. But that kind of makes me feel like I am obligated to then read the book. Because I'm like, I have to get a review out for this because no one's writing enough information. And I'm like, but then I'm reading books that I hate. And I'm like, it's a give or take. A little bit in a book hole right now ish. I'm definitely not on a steady pace, but there's a reason for that. I just read a series that was a little off, but regardless. And lastly, I will say this before I get into these two books, is that I have read some interesting books and some books that did not have reviews on them, books that I didn't know what was going to be in them. There's no guide, like you go to the movies and like the PG-13 guide and you kind of, it's like in the movie. So like you may not take your kids to it. I think that we need something like that for books. And I'm not saying to censor the books, like silence is like still publish the book. But I'm saying like this book, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, like why can't we just add like a little thing to the top of the barcode that just says like what's in it, or if there's smutty scenes in it or anything like that, because kid could walk into Barnes and Noble, a kid could walk into Target, a kid could walk into Walmart and pick up a book, and because there's no rating on the back or rating on it whatsoever and there's no review, but the kid wants to read, and reading is so important and so helpful for people regardless of what it is, if we just had some sort of small rating system on it. I also think that that rating system would help the banned book situation, because I hate to see books getting banned for content that's inside of them when people can read any book anytime, anywhere, outside of school. Their parents can allow them to do that at any time, and that's completely fine. But obviously there's some public school systems that don't allow certain books to be read, which is understandably so. But I'm saying, like, do not need to ban books. I think we need to put them more into of a category of like on the back, because to me, like, a cover, like, don't a book by its cover. I do that every day because that's all I have to go by. And it just drives me a little nuts because I'm like, I have to just go by the cover. I can't go by anything else. And if there was just like sort of some YouTube channels, and I don't know how it would necessarily be, but if someone could think about that, like sort of rating system on the back of some way, shape, or form, where it wouldn't take away from the book. The author could do anything they want with it and write it any way they want, but just so that it could go to the right people, because also as well is that I am a person that likes to read fantasy. And if I accidentally pick up a book that's not fantasy and then I DNF'd it and I bought it, and it's like, I wish I would have just known. I wish I would have known what was slightly in this book without giving away. You know what I mean? Like a PG-13 rating on a movie. Anyway, I'm not even getting into that, but I just wanted to talk about that briefly because it would save so many books from being banned. It really would, because it's public of speech, and however you say that, like, anyone can write about anything they want. I'm Shades of Grey exists, come on. But like, it'd be nice if on the back of that it had some sort of rating for like, because if parents are going to parent their kids, and you don't know what they're reading, but all you could do is start pulling books off the back of their shelves and start reading the little back, and then you might save you. It truly might. But again, the kid can read it past the time they're 18, like any other thing that happens. Anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox. What I wanted to say was these two books, which A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which has been turned into a TV show, and I think the first season has come out. It was very good. The whole first season is based on this book. The second season, to my knowledge, is going to be based on the second book. I'm in the middle of, I kind of did a little bit. I got a little bored with it, but it's fine. These are really good starter books. If you haven't read this series, please do, on like mystery kind of stuff. And this kind of book is kind of Nancy Drew kind of vibe, to where it's not Nancy, by the way. This is not, her name is Pippin. Sorry. I was like, I know that's wrong. Her name is Pip, and she basically solves a town murder that happened to friends of her school 5 years ago. And she actually solves it by the end of it. It goes deep and it goes crazy, and the show is pretty accurate. Would highly recommend that if you haven't read, if you like murder, mystery kind of stuff, this series. And there's like 4 books to this. Highly recommend. And honestly, that's also like a very YA book too. It's definitely like adult murder mystery. It's not hardcore. It's also very tiny. I obviously, like, I'm a big chunky girl. So, anyway, speaking of my last book, and this is what I'll wrap up with, The Midnight Library. The first time I read this book, I actually just really loved the cover, and I had zero idea what the heck it was about. It rocked me, I think, to my core, and I think that this is where my purpose in life really came from. I actually read a book, which I should have pulled it out, but I didn't, like a convenience store clerk. In that story, she talks about suicide as well. There's talks about suicide in this. I won't even get into that, but isn't you struggle, for me, it will be different for everyone. But if you struggle with suicide, this was such an enlightening and lovely book to read. And basically, it's the Midnight Library because, I'm going to spoil a little bit, but she kills herself at the very beginning of the book. And then when she does, her limbo, before she goes to heaven or wherever, is a midnight library where every book that she picks up off the shelf is a different life that she could have lived, and she gets to fully live it. And the way that it ends and the deepness of that, and there's so much in it to where I literally cried, but in the best way possible. This was so good. And not only that, is that I'm pretty sure, I know the second book that just came out is The Midnight Train of his that goes along with this. And to my knowledge, there's a person that they talk about in this book that she actually meets that is experiencing the same thing that she's experiencing, of like own personal midnight library, like died or whatever. And yeah, I think that they talk about that person in the second book, which would be sick because his life is going to be so much different. Anyway, yeah, there's one thing that I have hated that I clearly now love because I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. And I would highly recommend that if you haven't started reading, please do. It will not only just change your life, but it'll also just make you look at life so much differently because you can read other people's lives, even if they're fake lives. And I think as well that becoming more illiterate and also being able to read faster and seeing relationships in books can be helpful, preferably the older that I get, and realizing that I didn't have a lot of good friendships growing up, that there's definitely good. Now I get it. It's all fantasy, like none of it's real, but also just the idea that I can even pick up an educational book about my health now and read it because I'm so, like, my fun books. I have so many fun books. I have more fun books than I have educational books, but I'm just now getting into the real realm of educational books for my health. But I would have never, ever picked them up, thought about reading them at all if I didn't start on a reading journey. So sometimes you have to start in the fun spots of this, like the part, and then get to where you need to be, because I definitely need to read some certain books that are like towards me, helping me with my life and those kind of things. But I wouldn't pick them up if I don't have fun books. You know what I mean? So I will definitely say that I have definitely fallen in love with reading over the past 2 years. And if you're curious on seeing what the next thing is, that'll be my next video, which That's actually going to be a full series within itself because I don't know how much of that I'm going to post, but I haven't told anyone really about that yet. I've told a couple people, but not a lot. Yeah, it's something that I hated that I fell in love with.